Thanks everyone for joining. As you can see, JP is feeding a few of our pre-asked questions into the Q&A, but if you have questions that we can help you with during today's Ask the Experts webinar, feel free to use the Zoom Q&A feature and post your question there. We'll scan it and try to answer it as best we can today. Looks like most people have taken the chance to take a look at the poll, and we can get started maybe with a question from someone that has actually joined the call. There's a question: please suggest a Rundeck best practice to handle Rundeck and Linux. But before we get into that, I think I forgot to do my introduction slide, which is I'd like to welcome some new faces and maybe familiar ones of the past. One new face I think we have here is Mandy Walsh. She's a PagerDuty developer advocate with us. Today I'm moderating in place for Nathan. My name is Forrest Evans. I'm the Director of Product Management at Rundeck. We also have Greg Chase, another new face to the Ask the Experts webinar. He's the Director of Product Marketing at Rundeck. Pam Wanson, our technical expert here on the call today from our customer success team, and JP also from our field team, providing deep expertise there. Rainer, our community advocate engineer, dive into the forums. He's probably the person responding the most and helping the most. So let's get back to that question about Rundeck and the best practice to handle Rundeck and Linux. Anyone on the team want to take that question and help out?
Actually, we need a little bit more information in order to answer the question. Is that about running Linux on running Rundeck on a Linux system, or do you mean running Rundeck jobs on a target node? So, and the target node operating system is Linux.
So if you can respond either, I think in the chat, or actually we can just, you can unmute and answer.
We could also answer both. So if you are going to install Rundeck on a Linux system, we actually have in the documentation, in the installation section, there's a system requirements. So in kind of like a development environment, you could run it at the minimum, but if you're running, you know, a good number of jobs and stuff, you'll want to increase the CPU, right, and the memory and that type of thing. We really encourage customers to use one of the packages. So if your flavor of Linux is Red Hat or CentOS, right, we have a RPM package. It makes it super easy to do the upgrades. If you're on Ubuntu or flavor like that, you're going to use the Debian package. We recommend in a production environment, you're not going to install your database on the same system as Rundeck, right? Because you don't want to have any conflict with your, you know, with the system resources. You shouldn't use a built-in database. So Rundeck, you know, if you just install it through the package, it installs file-based database called H2. You should really use a production-ready type of database that's kind of a fully supported database. We support MySQL, which is kind of our most tested one, Postgres, as well as Oracle and Microsoft SQL. And from a customer success standpoint, I usually recommend going with the database that you have a DBA, like some resource that is familiar with the database, you know, and can support you. So whatever database that you guys are most familiar with and is common across your environment is the one that we recommend choosing. Hopefully that answers the question. And then if you're connecting to targets, right, Linux targets are typically going to have a connection using SSH. And there's, you know, just defining the correct connection information, storing your key in the Rundeck key storage, or, you know, a supported integration point like Vault or HashiCorp. Hopefully that answers the question.
In addition, Rainer's posted a few links and some other answers in the Q&A around that question that should provide some additional help. One question got moved to answered, and I'll take this one, is what is planned about GUI optimizations? The question is a little broad, but this does give us a good opportunity to talk a little bit about what's coming up in version 3.4.0. So that version's due out in a couple of weeks here, and we have done a significant revamp of the UI. For example, we've shrunk the left menu to allow more working space. We've added a new utility bar. We're calling it the utility bar. It's down in the footer. That's a new plugin point where we can add additional plugins and functionality. Significant, cleanup of what the UI, kind of looks like, more consistency, as well as enhancing the visualization around things like buttons and other items that maybe sort of fell to the background before, or maybe weren't quite as apparent. So for the GUI, look forward to version 3.4.0. Keep an eye on our release notes. You can sign up for that on the docs page. And when that comes out, you'll see a whole new Rundeck UI with that version. I can take a question here. There are a bunch of avenues for community support, like feature requests. There's GitHub, Google, Trello, StackOverflow. All appear to be active, although GitHub issues don't get the same attention as Google Group. Do you have a preferred channel, and are they the same people monitoring all of the channels? Currently, the Google Group is the best recommended area for open source discussion type of information. The GitHub issues, to address that specific part of the question, is typically we prefer just to focus on code related either changes or specific repeatable bugs to show up in there. That doesn't mean it doesn't get treated like a discussion forum now and then, but the discussions that happen in Google are a little bit more active. The Trello, I think there's still references out there to it. We're trying to chase those down and clean those up. It's essentially been abandoned at this point. A lot of the data out there is old. And then Stack Overflow, Rainer does a great job of chasing down all of these. There's also a Reddit forum and other areas like any community project. But I think from a recommendation standpoint, from Rundeck's perspective, is communication today happens primarily through that Google group. And then if there are code bugs or specific repeatable bugs, we can open a GitHub issue. And we do accept and review and approve PRs to the actual Rundeck project as a community. We've done a couple of those recently. So if you want to participate in the project, we do take those as well. So next question, setting the application proxy setting on Rundeck. The server is internal only with no NAT. We have a web proxy that we would like to use. This is from Tony Vu. I have a note on my background notes here that, Tony says he figured it out. I think there's a Reddit link out there. We'll post that Reddit link in the Q&A here for anyone else that's interested on it. Thanks, Tony, for joining, and glad you got that figured out. This might be a good one for Pam. How to configure Rundeck in a production environment. I think you covered some of this in your earlier answer, but what is the necessary configuration to be able to use Rundeck in production?
All right, so there's a few components, right? Number one, if we're talking about enterprise, then you're going to probably have more than one instance of Rundeck. So before the instances of Rundeck, between Rundeck and your clients, you'll put a load balancer, and you'll use the VIP in the load balancer to configure the Grails URL. Then you have your instances of Rundeck, right, which could be 2 or more. Each of those instances is going to be set up for some type of authentication. If you're in enterprise, you might use something like Okta or Ping. Also in both community and enterprise, you can use LDAP. If you install Rundeck on Tomcat, it gives you a few more options for the authentication that you could set up, right? So you can have a pre-authentication mechanism. On the kind of On the back end, there's a few things that you'll want to do. So the database will be installed separately from Rundeck, and you'll choose one of our database options, MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, right, or Microsoft SQL for your backend. If you're in a clustered environment, you're going to configure all of those systems to talk to that same database, and they'll use the same encryption. So you'll install one instance, it will set up your encryption when you do that, and then you'll actually copy your Rundeck config.properties to your other instance, so they both connect to that same database. You'll also want to set up your logs so that the logs are shared between all of your Rundeck instances. If you're just on open source, you may want to, right, you'll be backing up your database. So you may want to do something to back up those logs well from your execution history. And then if anybody else wants to jump in, if I forgot anything, we can also post the link to the documentation that explains all of the components and the Rundeck environment.
That covers quite a bit of it. That's a lot to digest, and maybe we'll move on to the next question. We're designing a process where we would design our Rundeck jobs on a volatile dev Rundeck. Job definitions would be added to a Git repository, then submitted to a production Rundeck instance through a pull request based process, so that our developers would be free to write their jobs, and when the ops review their jobs before putting them into the production. We wrote some scripts that allow us to import export the scripts so that we could automate the process. We'd like to know if the enterprise version could be helpful here. So I'm not sure if the scripts were written outside of it, but Rundeck does include an SCM integration. So your job definitions can be shared, managed, etc., through GitHub, GitLab, choose your flavor, and subsequently shared even in between environments. So that's built in. When you enable that functionality, it's built into that jobs pane. You can write it in a dev version of Rundeck, push it up to that cloud, and then pull it down from another one. As far as what the enterprise version could be helpful here, I don't think specifically on the SCM plugin that there's anything different between enterprise and open source, but there are a significant number of enterprise features that could help make writing your jobs easier. There's a lot of
there's a GitHub plugin for webhooks, right?
Yes, there's also the GitHub webhook for plugins that will, so GitHub has the ability to add secrets to their webhooks. That webhook plugin can process that secret and ensure that it's a safe webhook. There's also all the plugins for the job steps. So as far as writing the jobs, that can be much easier in enterprise than having to write out the complicated script to make whatever API call you're making. So all of our what I guess I'd call branded integrations with things like our partners like Datadog or Sensu or ServiceNow, etc. So there are quite a few features. It's hard to say if there's anything that would be helpful without talking some more, but we can always chat a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and one way, I'll just add this. So one way I've seen people take advantage of the enterprise features, right, to help with the SCM integration is through, you can actually use the Rundeck API to do your SCM import. So you can basically lock down your production environment and then use a webhook that's triggered from a merge into your production branch of your jobs, right? So as soon as you do the merge, GitHub's gonna send a webhook that will trigger the job to do the import. So you can have production entirely locked down. So you could also use like Git runner or something to run your script, and launch, trigger the API import that way too.
And then the last question we have in the Q&A today is modifying the default localhost to server IP address and modifying the properties file didn't make changes effective in either enterprise or open source versions. Ironically, I actually helped this particular customer earlier this week solve this. I believe Rainer's typing in the answer, but there was a specific setting that they had just happened to miss in their Rundeck config properties. Once that was set, they were able to edit that or access that server from the URL they were trying. The grails.server URL was the key. One question we get pretty regularly is about how to pass output from one step to another, but can't figure out how to do it. So this is within a job. How would I take the output from step number one and share that into step number two? Recently, we made public something we've been calling the Welcome Project. So out, I'll bring up the URL if I can really quickly here. So we have this Welcome Project environment, which is a sort of a standalone Docker environment. You didn't need to have Docker installed to run it, but you can stand this up and it comes with an example project that includes a whole walkthrough and tours on how to do this. There's this right now is kind of focused around the enterprise product. We're working on a community version as well, but we do have quite a few examples of these. If anyone's interested in how to get their hands on some of these jobs, I believe these jobs are not actually enterprise specific. We could share a copy of this project, or you can grab a copy of this project and check out how to pass variables between your job steps in different ways. Pam, there's another question that I've seen come up recently. I think it was on, must have been on Twitter or something. Is there a way to set a maximum number of execution history records to keep? It sounds like they have jobs over 1 million records, and the bulk delete only does about 20 or 30 at a time today.
So they wanted, well, you can run the bulk delete multiple times, right? If you go to your project settings.
Right. I think the other solution would be using the execution history clean.
Oh, yep. If you want to manually delete them.
Oh, Chris has a question. Hi, Chris. We did answer that question a little bit earlier. I'll go through it again. So the Google Groups is the best place for discussion related items. The GitHub, we try to reserve that for things like product, repeatable product bugs, code, specific issues, etc. When there's functionality or how to do something, right now the Google Groups is the best medium. StackOverflow is another option that's listed on our website. The Trello specifically, we've been trying to hunt down all the areas that's referred to. That was abandoned quite a while ago as far as feature requests, etc. But GitHub is more focused on the developers and bugs, and Google Groups being the best place for those communication bits. Rainer, who's on the call today, is the moderator for most of those. There's a Reddit forum, etc. And we're working on maybe some other ways to start doing communication out to the community as well.